quickly, before running down the second semester of real property, I'm going to go over the first semester subsections 1, estates and land, consisting of present possessory estates, followed by future interests, trusts, and the rule against perpetuities. There's the rule against restraints on alienation, concurrent estates, before entering into landlord and tenant, subpart 2, nature of a leasehold, a couple different kinds of estates, leasehold estates, leases, tenant duties and landlord remedies, landlord duties and tenant remedies, assignments and subleases, condemnation of leaseholds, tort liability of landlord and tenant. Then there's subpart 3, fixtures. In general, a fixture is a chattel that has been so affixed to the land that it has ceased being personal property and has become part of the realty. For example, S and B contract to sell and buy a house. Before vacating, S removes a built-in refrigerator. B claims that the item was part of the house. Is the refrigerator a fixture? If so, B is entitled to its return and appropriate compensation. It is important in dealing with fixture problems to distinguish between common ownership cases and divided ownership cases. Courts treat them differently, even though they often purport to apply the same tests. Common ownership cases are those in which the person who brings the chattel onto the land owns both the chattel and the realty. For example, X installs a furnace in her own home. Divided ownership cases are either ones where the person who owns and installs the chattel does not own the land. Example, T installs a furnace in her rented home, which belongs to L, or the person owns the land but does not own the chattel. For example, it is subject to a security interest held by the seller. In addition, there are cases involving more than two persons. Conflicting claims are made by the person having a security interest in the chattel and the mortgagee of the land. B, chattels incorporated into structure always become fixtures. C, common ownership cases. D, divided ownership cases. And E, third-party cases. Moving on to rights in the land of another, easements, profits, covenants, and servitudes. So this was covered in the second semester. I'll start here. In general, easements, profits, covenants, and servitudes are non-possessory interests in land. They create a right to use land possessed by someone else. For example, A, the owner of Blackacre grants to B, the owner of an adjacent parcel, Whiteacre, the right to use a path over Blackacre connecting Whiteacre to a public road. An easement has been created, giving B the right to use, but not to possess, the pathway over Blackacre. Easements, profits, covenants, and servitudes have many similarities in operation, coverage, creation, and termination. They also have important differences, mainly in the requirements that must be met for their enforcement. Easements. Introduction. The holder of an easement has a right to use a tract of land called the servient tenement for a special purpose, but has no right to possess and enjoy the tract of land. The owner of the servient tenement continues to have the right of full possession and enjoyment, subject only to the limitation that he cannot interfere with the right of special use created in the easement holder. Typically, easements are created in order to give their holder the right of access across a tract of land. For example, the privilege of laying utility lines or installing sewer pipes and the like. Easements are either affirmative or negative, appurtenant, or engross. Letter A. Types of easements. Affirmative easements. Affirmative easements entitle the holder to enter upon the servient tenement and make an affirmative use of it for such purposes as laying and maintaining utility lines, draining waters, and polluting the air over the servient estate. The right-of-way easement is another instance of an affirmative easement. Thus, an affirmative easement privileges the holder of the benefit to make a use of the servient estate that, absent the easement, would be an unlawful trespass or nuisance. Negative easements. A negative easement does not grant to its owner the right to enter upon the servient tenement. It does, however, entitle the privilege holder to compel the possessor of the servient tenement to refrain from engaging in activity upon the servient tenement that, were it not for the existence of the easement, he would be privileged to do. Courts historically recognized negative easements only for light air, subjacent or lateral support, and for the flow of artificial stream. Today, a negative easement is simply a restrictive covenant. Example: A owns lot 6. By written instrument, he stipulates to B that he will not build any structure upon lot 6 within 35 feet of the lot line. B has acquired a negative easement on lot 6. Letter B. Easement appurtenant. An easement is deemed appurtenant when the right of special use benefits the holder of the easement in his physical use or enjoyment of another tract of land. For an easement appurtenant to exist, there must be two tracts of land. One is called the dominant tenement, which has the benefit of the easement. The second tract is the servient tenement, which is subject to the easement right. One consequence of appurtenance is that the benefit passes with transfers of the benefited land, regardless of whether the easement is mentioned in the conveyance. So, A owns lot 6 and B owns lot 7, which are adjoining tracts of land. By a written instrument, B grants to A the right to cross B's tract, lot 7. A's use and enjoyment of lot 6 is benefited by virtue of the acquisition of the right to use lot 7 for this special purpose. The right is an easement appurtenant. B remains the owner of lot 7. A has only a right to use lot 7 for a special purpose, for example, the right to cross the tract. Number 1. Use and enjoyment. In an easement appurtenant, the benefits to be realized by the easement must be directly beneficial to the possessor of the dominant tenement in his physical use and enjoyment of that tract of land. It is not sufficient that the easement makes use of the land more profitable. Example: A owns lot 6 and B owns lot 7. A grants to B the right to use part of lot 6 to coal mine. The right is not an easement appurtenant because the benefit granted is not related to B's physical use and enjoyment of lot 7. Benefit attached to possession. The benefit of the easement appurtenant becomes an incident of the possession of the dominant tenement. All who possess or subsequently succeed to title to the dominant tenement become, by virtue of the fact of possession, entitled to the benefit of the easement. There can be no conveyance of the easement right apart from the possession of the dominant tenement. Except that the easement holder may convey the easement to the owner of the servient tenement in order to extinguish the easement. Number 3. Transfer of dominant and servient estates. Both the dominant and servient parcels can be transferred. As discussed above, if the dominant parcel is transferred, the benefit of the easement goes with it automatically, even if it is not mentioned in the deed, and becomes the property of the new owner. If the servient parcel is transferred, its new owner takes it subject to the burden of the easement unless she is the bona fide purchaser who acquires the servient land with no notice of the easement. There are 3 ways the person who acquires the servient land might have notice of the easement, which is actual knowledge, notice from a visible appearance of the easement on the land, or third, notice from the fact that the document creating the easement is recorded in the public records. Everyone who buys land is expected to inspect the land physically and to examine the public records. I'm skipping examples for the sake of time. Easement and gross. An easement and gross is created where the holder of the easement interest acquires a right to special use in the servient tenement independent of his ownership or possession of another tract of land. In an easement and gross, the easement holder is not benefited in his use and enjoyment of a possessory estate by virtue of the acquisition of that privilege. There is no dominant tenement. An easement and gross passes entirely apart from any transfer of land. A owns lot 6. Another example. By a written instrument, she grants to B the right to own a pipeline across lot 6. B receives the privilege independent of his ownership or possession of a separate tract of land. B has acquired an easement and gross. Easements and gross may be either personal, example O gives friend right to swim and boat on lake, or commercial, utility or railroad track easements. Generally, an easement in gross is transferable only if the easement is for a commercial or economic purpose. D. Judicial preference for easements appurtenant. If an easement interest is created and its owner holds a corporeal possessory estate that is or could be benefited in physical use or enjoyment by the acquisition of the privilege, the easement will be deemed appurtenant. This is true even though the deed creating the easement makes no reference to the dominant tenement. I will read that example because it doesn't make sense. The section judicial preference for easements appurtenant. Okay, actually it does make sense. It means that wherever there's a question, the court is going to, wherever there's a question between whether an easement is appurtenant or in gross, the court will deem it an easement appurtenant. So in this example, A conveys to B her heirs, successors, and assigns the right to use a strip 20 feet wide on the north edge of Blackacre for ingress and egress to Whiteacre. Because there is ambiguity as to whether the benefit was intended to attach to B's land, Whiteacre, or to B personally, a court will apply the constructional preference and hold that the benefit was intended to be appurtenant, with the consequence that any conveyance of Whiteacre to B will carry with it the right to use the strip across Blackacre. Creation of easements, number 2, and the scope and the termination of easements. And comparison to licenses. We'll complete the easement section before moving into profits on page 83. I will try to continue all of that in this recording. For the creation of easements, the basic methods of creating an easement are express grant or reservation, implication, and prescription. A. Express grant. Because an easement is an interest in land, the statute of fraud applies. Therefore, any easement must be memorialized in a writing that is signed by the grantor, the holder of the servient tenement, unless its duration is brief enough, commonly 1 year or less, to be outside the coverage of the particular state statute of frauds. An easement can be created by conveyance. A grant of an easement must comply with all the formal requisites of a deed. An easement is presumed to be of perpetual duration unless the grant specifically limits the interest, example for life or for 10 years. Express reservation. An easement by reservation arises when the owner of a present possessory interest of a tract of land conveys title but reserves the right to continue to use a tract for a special purpose after the conveyance. In effect, the grantor passes title to the land but reserves unto himself an easement interest. Note that, under the majority view, the easement can be reserved only for the grantor. An attempt by the grantor to reserve an easement for anyone else is void. There is a growing trend to permit reservations in third parties, but it remains a minority view. For example, G owns Lot 6 and Lot 7. which are adjacent. G sells lot 7 to B. Later, when G is about to sell lot 6 to A, B asks G to reserve an easement over lot 6 in favor of B. G agrees to do so and executes a deed of lot 6 to A that contains the following language: reserving an easement for a driveway in favor of lot 7, which is owned by B. The reservation clause is void and no easement is created. C, another method of creating an easement is implication, followed by D, prescription. Is there any? E, no. Okay, so an easement by implication is created by operation of law rather than by written instrument. It is an exception to the statute of frauds. There are only 3 types of implied easements: an intended easement based on the use that existed when the dominant and servant estates were severed; 2, an easement implied from a recorded subdivision plat or profit à prendre; and 3, an easement by necessity. We'll talk about each one in detail. Before going into that, prescription. Acquiring an easement by prescription is analogous to acquiring property by adverse possession. Many of the requirements are the same. To acquire a prescriptive easement, the use must be open and notorious, adverse and continuous, and uninterrupted for the statutory period. Note that the public at large can acquire an easement in private land if members of the public use the land in a way that meets the requirements for a prescription. Again, those 4: open and notorious, adverse, continuous use, and when the prescription easements cannot be acquired. So, when we return, we'll go into an easement implied from existing use, which is a quasi-easement, easements implied without any existing use, and easement by necessity, before going into the elements of easement by prescription.